What's going on, Skullbrains? Welcome to another episode of Skullbrain TV, and in this episode, let's find out who captured our three heroes in the next issue of The Ancestral Trail.
When he, who is the Chosen One, shall tread upon the ancient path, and battle there to overcome
the forces of the dark.
The Ancestral Trail, an epic story of myths, magic, and monsters. Book 7, Zoc, Cannibal Chief, trapped in the caves of flesh-eating dwarfs.
That's right, in the last issue, Richard and his two companions found themselves tied to a stalagmite deep within a cavern. So, let's find out how the story continues, but before we do, have you checked out the Ancestral Challenge for this week? If not, you can go and see the video here, and then come on back, keep an eye out for those hidden objects, and see if you can guess who the villain of this book is based on. Let's do this.
On the 7th day, captives bound, caged underground, release is found in length around, a magic beam by evil seen. Enemies will rise from below, and dark waters carry the foe. Prisoners plight beyond the stern, now the slithering monsters turn. A new deep opens ere the burn.
The rough surface of the stalagmite cut into Richard's back. He squirmed uncomfortably against the ropes which held the three companions bound to the pillar in the dimly lit cave. The voices grew closer, then a thick-set dwarf stepped out of the gloom. "They're awake!" the odd-looking creature scoffed as a crowd of smaller dwarfs pushed and jostled behind him to get a closer look at the three captives. "I am Zoc," the dwarf said, "and you are my prisoners." Richard gasped in dismay as Zoc scuttled forward, aiming Jarut's dagger straight at his chest. Instead of the expected blow, Richard felt the blade cut through the ropes that held them bound to the stalagmite. "Bring them to the brood hall," Zoc ordered. Orkin, Richard, and Melik found themselves surrounded by grinning dwarves clasping stone knives and heavy wooden clubs. Richard noticed that some of the dwarfs were carrying Orkin's weapons, making boastful swipes with his sword as they passed it round. The three stumbled on through a maze of caves and narrow tunnels. Losing all sense of direction ahead of them, Zoc swaggered through his realm with utter assurance. Every now and then he shouted back at his followers to hurry. They, in turn, closed in to jab their captives with knives and force them into a jog. "Do you know who they are?" Richard muttered to his companions. "These are my people," Melik said in a low-pitched voice. "But now they are under control of the Evil One. I heard that they have become cannibals." "So why haven't they eaten us yet?" Orkin said. "Where are they taking us?" "Oh, to the pot, I suppose," Melik replied in a frightened voice. Further talk was cut off as the dwarves hustled their uncooked meal into yet another tunnel. Zoc urged them on even faster until the trio finally emerged into a vast domed cavern. They were astonished at the scene which greeted them. In pride of place stood a tall wooden totem pole, adorned with carved faces whose expressions conveyed both glee and horrible savagery. Richard noticed that the carved pole was held in great respect. When a dwarf came near it, he placed one hand on his belly and brought the other across his chest to his shoulder in salute. Around the edge of the cavern were dark openings, each with a bubbling cauldron and a cage at its entrance. Richard was horrified to see that some of the cauldrons were boiling at full blast, with half-cooked limbs dancing lifelessly to the fire's command. First a head, its flesh loosening from the skull, appeared above the surface. then an arm, firm yet tender, then a leg boiled to a juicy brown joint. At last, Richard recognized the smell he had detected earlier when tied to the stalagmite. It was not the smell of cooking, but that of freshly slaughtered meat, rank and salty. His stomach tightened in automatic revulsion. With horror, Richard realized they were being dragged to an empty cage by the totem pole. A huge pot simmered hungrily nearby. Willing hands thrust the three into the cage and slammed the door. The trio felt the cage lift off the floor and watched helpless as their weapons were placed on a nearby boulder. Zoc gave an ugly leer and, summoning a group of his henchmen, stomped out of the brood hall. Orkin rattled the door, but it was firmly locked. The bars were made of some tough wood, rigid as iron, and bound in a narrow lattice by rock-hard strips of rawhide. "Well, what do we do now?" Orkin asked. "Oh, we're lucky they didn't take the Book of Prophecies when they disarmed us," Melik said, sifting through the pages. "I'll see if it's any help." Melik read the riddle out in a low voice. "Well, the first line is clear even to me," he said as he closed the book. In response, Orkin just slumped to the floor. Richard thought for a moment, then pointed to the rope looped around Melik's waist. "That's our way out," Richard exclaimed. "Escape is found in length around. It must mean Melik's rope." "It's not a rope we need. It's our weapons," Orkin said in exasperation, staring at his sword and bow on the boulder just below their cage. "Yeah, of course," Richard said, "and the rope will get them for us. We'll make a slipknot and haul them in." "That's not a bad idea," Orkin said, taking the rope from Melik. With astonishing speed, he fashioned an easy-running slipknot. "Here, let me do it," Melik said, taking the looped end of the rope and lobbing it underhand towards their weapons. As if by magic, the open loop landed perfectly round the hilt of Orkin's sword. Melik gave a sharp tug and the rope tightened around its target. He pulled gently until the sword teetered onto its point, then swung off the boulder. As Melik hauled it upwards, Orkin reached through the bars for the pommel and pulled the weapon into the cage. "What else have we got?" Orkin whispered. Richard felt a shudder run through his body. Where was the pod? Had they taken his bag as well as Jarut's dagger? He felt under his tunic and was relieved to find the bag and pod were still there. Richard rooted around inside his bag. "My torch," he whispered in surprise. Richard had forgotten about the small flashlight. He clicked it on and off. The batteries still worked. "What's that?" Melik asked, surprised by the strange light. "We've got one chance," Richard said, ignoring the question. He brought the others into a huddle and outlined his plan. Meanwhile, in a nearby cave, Zoc and his men were arguing about Richard and whether or not they should eat him. They recognized Orkin and Melik as creatures from their own world, but the boy was something new and strange. Zoc was all for putting him in the pot, but the others, afraid of the unknown, protested that it might bring bad luck. "Right," Zoc raised his hand in final decision. "We eat the two now, and leave the odd one for later." He led his kinsmen back to the brood hall. As he approached the cage, the frantic pounding of drums filled the air. "You," Zoc pointed at Richard, "stay there. You two, come out now." One of the dwarfs leaped nimbly onto the bars and opened the cage door. He grinned and grabbed Melik's arm. Quick as lightning, Orkin's sword came to a rest at the dwarf's throat. While Orkin disarmed him, Richard pulled his arms back and tied the rope around his wrists. It was all over in seconds. For a moment, Zoc was taken aback, but he quickly recovered his composure. "What now?" he mocked. "You can't play that trick twice." "Get them!" he shouted to his men. Just then, Richard shone his torch full on Zoc's face. The chief reared back, dropping Jarut's dagger. To Zoc and his men, the light appeared to be coming from Richard's hand. "Magic! They're sorcerers!" Zoc cried. For the first time, a note of fear came into Zoc's voice. "Run!" he bellowed as he led his men out of the hall. For a while, Richard, Melik and Orkin stared in surprised delight. Then the three jumped from the cage, dragging their terrified captive with them. Stopping only to grab their weapons, they ran into a brightly lit tunnel. It was wide and straight, with an earth floor that had been beaten smooth by countless feet. Flaming torches sputtered along the walls, giving off an oily, sweet-smelling smoke. A faint rumour of drums drifted through the air as they hurried along. As if responding to a coded signal, their prisoner began to struggle. Richard shone the torch squarely into the dwarf's crumpled face, and the prisoner stopped squirming. Richard was trying to think about a course of action when his eye was drawn to an opening on their left. As he squinted to see in the darkness, he sensed Golan calling from inside. "Down here," Richard cried to the others as they turned into the tunnel. The steady beat of drums rose higher and higher. Zoc was coming for vengeance. The walls of the tunnel were damp and slimy. Rusty stains from exposed iron deposits streaked the rock, but the air was cool and fresh. "I think we're getting near water," Orkin suggested. Then, rounding a corner, they came upon a vast lake. Before them, hauled halfway up the rocks, were a number of rafts and boats. "Well, let's take one," Richard said, heading for a boat big enough to take them and their prisoner. "What about the monsters in the riddle?" Melik queried. "Well, they could be out there." "Well, that's right," Richard said, "but we don't have a choice. Zoc will be upon us in any minute." "Wait," Orkin broke in. "You'd better push off the other boats." Before Richard could unfasten the slimy ropes, he heard angry shouts and pounding of many feet coming down the tunnel. Orkin and the prisoner were already in the boat with Melik's help. Richard pushed it onto the lake. As the first water lapped over their shoes, they jumped into the stern. The craft wobbled uncertainly, then settled on an even keel. Richard and Melik each took an oar and began to row as hard as they could. "We should have scuttled those boats," Orkin muttered. "Zoc can still chase us." "There was no time," Richard puffed. "Pah!" The prisoner spat at Richard, his courage returning at the thought of being rescued.
"You'll never get away. Zoc will catch you."
The dwarf's words sent a chill down their spines. Melik and Richard increased their efforts, putting all their strength into rowing, straining hard against the rowlocks. They were a good distance from the shore when their small boat came to a sudden stop. "What is it?" Richard asked. "I don't know," Orkin replied from the bow. "I can't see a thing. Hand me your torch." Richard passed over the torch and Orkin shone its beam over the lake. "I can't see anything," he said. "Try rowing harder." Richard and Melik called desperately at the oars. The boat slid forward a fraction and then stopped. "Wait!" Orkin cried. "I think I saw something move." As Orkin shone the torch down into the water, a narrow set of jaws rose out of the darkness and fastened on his arm. Orkin jumped back just in time, losing only a shred of his sleeve. In the beam of the torchlight they could see a mass of squirming grey eels, as thick as a man's thigh, and each ending in a vicious, sharp-toothed snout. As they stared wide-eyed into the teeming waters, Zoc's men appeared across the lake and boarded the boats and rafts. Zoc was coming towards them in a shallow boat, illuminated at either end by flickering candles held by shiny skulls. As the dwarfs came closer, hoarse bellows of triumph echoed from the lake's surface to the roof high above. Orkin moved fast. He grabbed their prisoner and with one supple movement raised the dwarf above his head. Before Richard and Melik could say a word, Orkin had flung the dwarf into the water. Zoc's boat was only a short distance away, and in the light of the burning candles both groups could see the eels surge back towards the dwarf. "Now, the slithering monster's turn," Orkin grinned, quoting from the riddle. "Let's go." Its course now free, the boat leaped forward as Richard and Orkin grabbed the oars and started pulling. Before long they were well ahead of Zoc's warriors, who were blocked by the eels. They splashed noisily across the lake, caution thrown to the wind until they hit the opposite bank. "Hurry," Orkin said, jumping out to heave the boat ashore. Looking back, Richard saw a smoky red glow where Zoc was battling his way through the eels. Then he shone the torch into the forbidding darkness ahead, and saw a tunnel leading off the lake. Orkin led the way through the narrow passage. The light was weak and shadowy, and the ground underfoot was smooth. They made good time until Orkin came to a halt. The path suddenly stopped, leaving the tunnel split by a wide gap. As they peered into its depths, they could see no bottom to the precipice. They could go no further. Richard put his head in his hands and groaned. And that is the end of book number 7. So, how'd you go with the Ancestral Challenge for this week? Were you able to find all of the hidden objects? And do you think Zoc was based on Cannibal Zim or Baba Yaga? Tune into the Ancestral Challenge next week where I will reveal the answer. And in the pinned comment below you can find a link where you can download the map pieces that came with this issue. So, until next time, stay tuned and stay skull-brained.